KEF Connect. Conversations that matter. Tune in every week for interviews with industry trendsetters and community changemakers that will instill inspiration and ignite action. Visit www.kefholdings.com and click KEF Connect to listen.
Episode 2 of Season 6. This is the KEF Connect podcast series, making an absolute difference, connecting listeners to the trendsetters, trailblazers, creating an impact in their industries and communities. Now, last episode was fantastic. We spoke on the topic of wellness. I mean, such a huge topic to cover, but we got through it with such wonderful guests. This time around, episode 2, mental health matters. And I've been joined by even more fantastic guests this episode. Dani Hakim, who is heading Safe Space Social, a nice little alliteration there, a tongue twister as well, which is all about transforming corporates, community and culture through conversations about mental health. Dani, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And our second guest for today is Omar Al Owais, who is Director of Content for With Hope UAE, which is an NGO promoting mental health awareness for the UAE community. Both of you, thank you once again for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Now, again, mental health is basically the same topic as wellness. There is so much to cover, and I know we don't have hours or days to sit here to talk, but we will try our absolute best. I'm going to, first of all, I gave a little introduction about who you are and what you do, but I would love if you could just dive a bit deeper and talk to the people about who you are, what you do, especially here in the region. So Dani, over to you.
So my background isn't in mental health, but I have my own journey as my kind of qualifications, let's say. My background's actually in marketing, and it was when working in very busy, hectic advertising agency life that my wheels fell off, and I struggled really badly with postnatal depression. I kind of lost a lot of my identity, and really through that process, looking at what was available from a support system perspective, I really kind of struggled to find something, a place where I felt safe in order to learn, grow, move through what I was going through. So that's really where Safe Space started, was to create safe spaces for people to just be curious about their mental health. At that point, I was still stubborn enough not to think that I don't need therapy, I don't need any kind of like medical help. And I think that would have been a really great stepping stone for me back then. So really what we're doing is using the things that marketeers are good at, which is engagement and content creation, to rebrand and reframe mental health. So it's something that people will feel more comfortable to engage with sooner rather than later.
I love that, completely changing the conversation, I guess, the direction of it. Over to Omar, if you could share what you do and how you came about doing it.
Of course. I would say I probably had a similar journey as you did, Dani. So I do not have a background in psychology or mental health. My background is actually in international relations. That's what I did my bachelor's in. Recently, I've joined With Hope, which is a mental health NGO that seeks to spread awareness on mental health in the UAE through advocacy, campaigning, and partnerships. This mental health NGO actually started perhaps 5 or 6 years ago through volunteering at Al Amal Hospital. And it was actually started by people, all of whom have full-time professions in completely different fields than mental health, but it's the passion and interest for mental health advocacy that joined them all together. And this is where the power of collaboration flourishes.
I completely agree with you, and we'll definitely go into that deeper when it comes to the collaboration over here in the region. I would like to break the ice with this episode and ask you a pretty big question. I know it's going to be very hard to answer because there's no right or wrong here, but Dani, what does mental health mean to you?
So I think we've got to be aware that mental health is a spectrum of things. A lot of the time when we're talking about mental health, we're actually talking about mental illness, and the two are different things. So really on that spectrum, or the rainbow of mental health, if you want to look at it in more of a positive spin, we have a point of diagnosis, which then would mean we have people that are struggling specifically with mental illnesses. But mental health is everything in between. And when we talk, we hear these sort of statistics like 1 in 4 people struggle with their mental health. the real stat is that 100% of people have mental health. And that's what we really need to be aware of, focus on, and look at how we can play in all of the space, and looking at how people are engaged with themselves, with society. And what we've kind of found through the content that we produce at Safe Space and the professionals that we work with is the underlying kind of crux of a lot of this stuff is self-awareness, and the self and mental health are very closely connected. So really for us, it's about looking at the whole realm that exists in mental health and helping people to understand it easier.
And there is that huge spotlight on awareness more and more. And Dani's touched on it, Omar, but for you, mental health, how important has that been for you? Is that a recent discovery for you, or is this always been kind of instilled in who you are?
I would say it's always been instilled in who I was. So I was a columnist at an online magazine called Sale Magazine ever since I was 14. And I didn't realize that I've been writing about mental health ever since. I would think, or I would assume that it was perhaps a recent step in my journey, in my career. But I didn't realize, it only took me going through my archive to realize how long I've cared about it, how long I've written about it.
Well, see, that's so interesting because, like we said a bit earlier, people discover it in different points of their journey. And again, there is absolutely no right or wrong. The awareness is the most important part of it. Now, these conversations that we have, I mean, so incredible that we can be around at a table here in the year of 2021, just having a normal conversation and understanding all of us how important it is. But there are still societies out there, still cultures out there that potentially don't quite understand it, don't accept it, brush it to the side. Dani, how important are these conversations on mental health, no matter your background, no matter your gender?
It's vital, and I think it should be starting, in schools and, parents speaking to their children about emotions. And, again, when we're thinking about mental health, it includes that sort of it's like a Venn diagram where emotional health sort of sneaks in as well. So those conversations, in all cultures aren't normalized. When we talk about, to the child that's angry, we want them to stop being angry and to kind of so we don't really have the tools in our toolbox as parents or as teachers or as, community members to really kind of tackle it at that stage. And I think this is where we really have an opportunity in order to get a bit better at opening it up sooner in life than allowing it to kind of get out of control. Because adulting is tough. And when we get to that point and we get into debt or we lose our job or our marriage breaks down or whatever comes along, because it does come along, we need to be more resilient and prepared for it mentally.
And Omar, with Hope, I mean, you must have had so many conversations over the years when it came to mental health, and you must have surely seen, I'm hoping, a positive progress over the years when it came to these topics. Is that right?
Most definitely. Although I'm fairly new to with Hope, I can say that the progress I've seen through mental health in my own journey actually traces to before I even joined the NGO. So around 2 years ago, I was actually the Rosalind Carter Fellow for Mental Health Journalism in the UAE. And I've done a lot of interviews with people my age, because the focus of my journalism and my research was mental health, basically the topic of mental health amongst youth. And I noticed a lot of awareness amongst my peers my age, whether they were from the country or not from the country, whether they were from different socioeconomic backgrounds. While perhaps the stigma may still linger among us, perhaps some people wouldn't talk about certain topics very freely in the company of others. I noticed an awareness that honestly exceeded my expectations.
And I'd love to actually dive a bit deeper into that, the type of person we're talking about, because we spoke about the cultural background of someone, the age of someone. You said yourself that in the younger generations, people are definitely more aware of it and definitely more comfortable speaking about it. I've noticed in my own conversations and the people I've come across within my network or community that it's definitely the older generations that are not inclined to easily speak about mental health and to easily speak about what they are going through. How do we break that? Because I think it's easier to kind of get through to the youngsters than it is to people who are pretty much, I would say, stuck in their ways in a bit, Dani. What do you think that is? Is that because mental health awareness back in the day, in previous generations, was more of a privilege? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, so I'm having this conversation with my parents at the moment. My dad's not very well, he has vascular dementia. My mum is his carer, who's, they've worked really hard all their life, but never had to deal with something as big as this, is very obviously struggling. As someone that has a general anxiety disorder, I can see things in her, and it's not up to me to, diagnose her or kind of like slip information to her and send her emails and things, but just be there to listen to her and support her. And I think it's through those exchanges where we kind of, being a friend to my parents and like holding space for her, I feel that that's like a really important step. A lot of the time when we think about mental health support, we're just actually thinking about therapy, and we want to really look at all the expansive ways we can help people. And a lot of us don't have really great listening skills. It's not something that we've ever, a skill that we've sat down and worked on. And really, I think this is where we have an opportunity to be more friendlier, be listening, be there for the older generation, rather than trying to coerce them into something that is quite alien for them. Because I think they're a generation that's, let's say this conversation didn't exist for them, they like to sort of tough it out, be strong, don't want any kind of like, they're the parents, they're the ones that are in charge. So really I think it's a very sort of softly approach, but with lots of kind of open arms and open ears.
And Omar, I mean, what I would love to ask you is, especially when it comes to the difference between females and males, because not necessarily that females are, more inclined to open up. That's not the case whatsoever. But I do feel like there is this stigma around, being a man and being emotional, and, it's considered, he shouldn't be like that. Have you seen a change in that, or has there been a positive shift?
Obviously, whatever I answer is from my personal experience.
Yes.
I can't give perhaps an all-encompassing perspective. Perhaps in my own surroundings, in my own network, I would say yes. But then again, I'm surrounded by people who perhaps care about the same things as I do. So I can't really answer this question. But I'll tell you this, we live in an age where there's so much knowledge around us. And it's so easy for us to access that knowledge. You can find out whatever you want, not just from your phone, not just from Safari. There are accounts on Instagram that break down so many complex topics for you in a very mundane manner that's easy for you to comprehend. And just consuming that knowledge every day subconsciously makes you more knowledgeable about these topics. And perhaps, yes, maybe that is a factor influencing this. But what I noticed is that despite whether guys open up or not, despite whether guys feel that it is okay to open up or not, they do it very late. And that's not me saying it, that's actually a lot of scholarly research saying it. And it doesn't just say that, it says that men, even when they do reach that stage of opening up or seeking help, they report their emotional issues very differently. Perhaps they wouldn't say that I am sad or I am hurt. Perhaps they would say I am feeling stressed and at work, and this is what happened. So even when they do reach that stage of seeking help, perhaps it doesn't reach its maximum potential. And maybe in this regard, a lot of research is suggesting that perhaps the metrics or the diagnosis systems for managing depression among men or detecting depression among men must be specialized or personalized for them.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important as well. And it's kind of, when people speak about love languages, it's a mental health language that people really do have. And I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it. Now, you did touch on social media and the positive impacts, I believe, it has had on the mental health conversation. Dani, over to you. When it does come to social media, I mean, especially during the pandemic, which, of course, here in the UAE, we kind of feel like we're over now, we're good, but is of course happening and still very serious in other countries across the globe. But for mental health, how important was the aspect of social media for all of us to kind of just keep going and actually understand? Because for the first time in a very long time, we all had to sit still. We stood still and we had to really look within. So how important was that role of social media?
I think social media has, quite a bad rep in the mental health world. I think a lot of us use social media as a distraction from what's kind of happening around us. You mentioned sitting still. I personally, again, not very good at sitting still, not good at taking breaks, and I will turn to social media as that kind of escapism almost. So I think it was really good for making sure that people had that awareness, people, knew what was kind of happening around them, that was still connected to people. But I think we have a responsibility, each individual, to learn how to make sure that it has that positive impact on us in general, because I think the mindless scrolling comes with a lot of guilt, that sort of productivity guilt that we have, like, I've just spent an hour in, somebody that I went to schools with next door neighbours' wedding photos. How did I get there, and how did I waste all this time doing this? So I think I'm a huge fan of social media curation, making sure that the people I follow, the messages I follow are giving me a boost, improving some element of my life in some shape or form. There's still silly cat videos, because I think that does all add to people's enjoyment sometimes. And it was really from a book that I read called Digital Minimalism, where I was in between that, social media, consuming and working in advertising. It was something that I felt I needed for my job. Flipping to complete detox. Nope, take it off, delete the apps, don't need it, removing myself completely and not feeling that connection again. So heading straight back in at the deep end. And reading that book really put a lot of things into context for me and helped me to kind of craft a lot of the ways that I use social media and the people that I follow. So I think I had a good experience, and it's definitely something that I think a lot of people can have, but a lot of people do get a lot of anxiety around social.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think there's a real fine line between the healthy side of social media, and then before you know it, within the same second, you feel, I just want to leave, I just want to disappear, I just want to go away for a bit.
I relate.
Yeah, right? I mean, Omar, what is that? Because it's about finding your balance, right? Whether you are a personally using social media, even when it comes to your own business, and it's literally where you make your money, it is so hard to know when you just need that break. Now, more and more, I mean, people are talking about social media breaks. People are talking about the detox. What is that, Omar? Do you think that that's a good thing or a bad thing? Or do you think people should just accept social media is there and we have to just adjust as individuals?
I think there's no right or wrong approach to this. I mean, it's funny that we're talking about this today, because right now, before coming here, I actually archived all of my posts on Instagram because I felt like it. And I do this from time to time. I go on unfollowing sprees from time to time. Sometimes I have time restrictions on my apps. Sometimes I remove those time restrictions. I think it's doing whatever feels right to you in that moment. And then if it feels like you have to perhaps change things up a bit, that's fine. You should be flexible. We shouldn't be rigid with ourselves. Sometimes we want to mindlessly scroll. That's okay. We don't always have to be in that productivity cycle. And sometimes we want to not reply to WhatsApp messages. People really don't understand how draining replying to messages can be. We don't always have to be wired to our phones. And if we want to be wired to our phones, if it feels right in the moment, why not? But I think the key here is to be mindful. The key is to understand what's consuming our energy. And the key is to draw limits where limits must be drawn. And before all of that, the key is also to be kind with ourselves not to guilt ourselves for using social media, and not to shame ourselves in the process as well.
And everybody's experience is completely different.
Exactly.
I agree with that. Now, kind of shifting the conversation away from social media, we spoke a bit earlier about, generational stigmas of mental health and how it's changed over time. How do you think the world has changed in order to now cater more positively to the mental health conversation? Because, we now are living in a sort of fast-paced world, ironically, after a pandemic where, like we said, we all slowed down. But I feel like now, since the world has started back up again, we're going even quicker, we're moving even faster. And so do you think that we're now living in, or there's actually more stresses in our life that is kind of increasing the conversation of mental health?
Well, I think one of the big silver linings for the pandemic was that pause, that reset. There were times when I kind of had to question myself, like, did I manifest this? Because before that, I was like, the world needs to just slow down. Can everyone just take a break? Like, this is out of control. We just need to stop, and then everything happens. So, whilst questioning my power within that, I also had that opportunity for the first time to not be in constant back-to-back meetings, and to be, working on things that I put to the side for a little while. And really, I think in those times, everybody's got a little bit closer to, themselves, what's important to them. And I think what we're experiencing now is kind of the after effects of that, where people have reevaluated a lot of what's important to them. I think the biggest shift has come in the workplace. So Safe Space do a lot of work with organizations to help them at the kind of like corporate culture level, but also at their employee level, to understand how to create more psychologically safe spaces within the organizations. And that's not just for the sake of doing it, it's because it's really good for business. So I think there's this element of like, we've been refreshed and renewed, and we've had this time, but in Element, everybody's frazzled and everybody is really kind of still struggling. I don't think anyone has truly rested. So I think this is where this wave of unrest is kind of coming from people, where it's people are sort of desperate for a change and everything to sort of settle back into where it was, and maybe it's just going to take time. Let's see.
Yeah, ironically, I feel like before the pandemic, although we were going super quickly, the mind was kind of just adjusting and going with it. But actually, when we did sit still, or some of us did, Dani, the mind was then going on overdrive, and it was kind of working way harder, I feel, than it was before. Have you noticed that with Hope, Omar, the people that come to you for help or seek guidance or anything like that, or want to get involved with the NGO, do you feel like there's been an increase after the pandemic?
Most definitely. So one of the things that With Hope does is collaborates between entities and experts to create not podcasts, panel discussions and workshops. And so that used to happen very occasionally in the past before the pandemic, but then with online panels being a thing, it used to happen really frequently. And I guess, ironically, with that being our goal, as in spreading awareness, stillness, and all of that, it kind of pushed some people into overdrive.
It really did. And I'd love to actually go back to the topic of, Dani, you mentioned specifically mental health in the workspace. So many people lost their jobs. So many people, especially of course in this region, had to leave the country, had to pick up everything and go, their families, salaries, just everything. Their whole lives changed overnight. That workspace conversation, I mean, more and more companies now, actually after the pandemic, catering more around the conversation, catering more around the individuals, trying to do what they can to support the people. And like you said, it actually increases productivity and happiness in the workplace. How important do you think that is to be part of that? And for any corporates or companies listening right now that maybe are considering going down that route, haven't quite pushed it yet, I think you'd be a great person to kind of convince them, I guess.
Yeah, so, for us, you can have fluffy conversations, which, sometimes in the mental health space, there is a lot of kind of excess, but getting down to, the nitty gritty, there's between a 4-to-1 and 10-to-1 return on investment for every dollar that's spent on mental well-being in the workplace. which is bananas. You can't get that kind of return on the stock market these
Yeah.
days, you know. So when we are looking at organizations, I think first and foremost, it has to be organizations that are ready to really commit. A lot of the time, I think we get, we call them band-aids. So companies are like, oh, I think people are really struggling. Let's just, you know, throw a workshop at it. And that's great for that hour and a half. We have a fabulous session, but what next?
Right.
So we work with companies that very much are not just kind of investing in this now, but want to put a long-term kind of strategic approach to well-being in place. And, you know, mental health is a very vast kind of topic. Everybody has a different experience with mental health or where they're at on that kind of spectrum. So really what we've seen is the companies that are investing and that are putting this higher on their agenda, you know, are doing better in business. The relationships with their clients, the internal reduction in turnover, you know, how their ability to innovate and be creative. There's actually no downside to it, and this is kind of what we find tricky sometimes. It's a no-brainer. Like there's really nothing, you know, that should prevent organizations from doing this, but not everybody's ready. I think that's the case. So it's baby steps, you know, and making sure that whatever it's going to take in order to kind of provide that. And that's why, you know, Safe Space, we really find it very important to have this huge network, you know, even with organizations like with Hope and anybody else that is doing good work in this space. There is enough of the pie to go around, and it's really these important networks where we can rely on each other and help people to get any kind of solutions in place.
One thing we actually spoke about in the last episode when it came to wellness was a lot of people jumping, or a lot of brands, a lot of companies jumping on the bandwagon, so to say. You know, for example, a cafe will say, oh, we're all clean and we're all this free, we're all that free, just to put a label on the front window to get people to kind of be sold on the wellness front. Now, with mental health, of course, the conversation is absolutely going in the right direction, I feel, but there are still people who, I would say, potentially jump on the bandwagon to kind of say, oh, at work we're having a mental health day, or, you know, just to kind of just tick the box and say they've done it. Omar, do you think that is, I mean, of course it is detrimental to, I guess, the authenticity of what mental health really means. How do we kind of shift that, and how can we actually tell the difference between, you know, what is actually authentic and wanting to put it in the right direction of the conversation and not?
I think when it comes to figuring out what's authentic and what isn't, I think it's quite obvious. I think eventually people will figure it out. The good thing about labels and tokenism is that, yeah, like people, it's actually free advertising for whatever purpose you're passionate about. But while it is harmful in the sense that misinformation is spread, mundane topics are being discussed. Like, honestly, it really frustrates me that to this day, so much would be invested in a workplace event where the topic is, what is mental health? I think that's what has already been established in the past, and maybe that's coming from me as someone who's in the mental health landscape. Maybe that's just my perception of it being a problem. Maybe it really isn't a problem. I don't know. But I think we really need to move beyond that stage. I think today, people know what mental health is. I think now it's not a matter of spreading awareness about mental health. I think it's about giving people the tools to understand mental health in respect to themselves, in context to themselves. And I'm saying this because when I told you I was writing about mental health ever since I was 14, it didn't take me until 5 years later to being burnt out from university to realize what mental health issues I had myself. And that's coming from someone who knew about mental health. What about people who did not know anything about mental health?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I'm actually glad you took the conversation there, Omar. It's like you just read my mind. It's amazing. I
do have that superpower.
You do, I can tell. So just to get a bit personal, I mean, we kind of touched on it a bit earlier, and of course, whatever you are comfortable to share, that would be fantastic. Dani, you mentioned earlier, of course, your own mental health journey and how tough certain points of your journey have been. I guess my question to you is, mental health, like when did you first become aware of it as an individual, and how has your journey really expanded?
So I was at university and I was prescribed antidepressants, which was a bit of a surprise to me at that point because I didn't feel like I was depressed. I had a back injury, I'd had multiple operations, I was struggling with chronic pain, and essentially the diagnosis in that spot was I'm not dealing with this well, and that I needed this medication on top of very strong painkillers in order to keep with the system and carry on with my studies, not have to go home. And I think I was just sort of quite naive. I took the doctor's word and I took the medication, and it really didn't agree with me. And it was actually through that process and through struggling with chronic pain that I then started to look a little bit deeper in, well, who am I? Why is this kind of happening to me? What am I going through? What are my options? And found a therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, to help me deal with my pain. So it was a very strange introduction to the world of mental health, but so grateful that I went through that mess, which I kind of look back at it then. But I think being a little bit older and wiser, and now looking back at my whole life, I've always had a very my brain isn't typical. I think I've always been different and been very unique, so I have different ways of approaching things. And it really wasn't until I then had my first child that everything got messy again. And I just didn't have the good coping mechanisms in place. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating well, I was working too much, I was away from my family, all the kind of good foundational stuff was out the window for me. So it was kind of an accident waiting to happen that did, but being maybe the stubborn part of me didn't also want to believe that it was happening. And I think the reason why it was sort of so shocking again in hindsight is that I am a very smart, switched on, I used to work in healthcare, individual that, like you said, I knew what mental health was, I'd been through it, but I almost kind of allowed it to happen again, which, again, issues I probably need to work through, but it was just so sort of surprising that I could get back to there, but also not feel comfortable to mention it to my the team that I was working with or my friends. I really just kind of got my head down and cracked on. But it's so difficult when you're going through this thing that's supposed to be the most amazing time of your life, and I wasn't forming a good bond with my child. I hated life. I didn't want to kind of wake up in the morning, and that was just really difficult to process. But I processed it by keeping a lid on it, which wasn't the best I think approach for me at that point, but it's what I needed to do. I don't think, looking back, if I'd have talked or if I'd have it would have made it any better in that moment. I just had to deal with it how I did. But again, super grateful that happened, because it opened my eyes to a whole realm of again sort of mental illness that is so frequent in so many women, and to then have the sort of empathy and have walked in those shoes and really understand it, it's allowed me now to be more focused on what it is that I want to do. When I had my second child, the game was changed. I made sure I slept, I made sure that I had people around me, and very vocal about the topic now, because if my journey can pave the way for someone else not to go through what I went through in some way, shape or form. I know that postnatal depression isn't always something that you can avoid, but making sure that people do have the best support system. If I can do anything around that, then I'm there.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Dani. But I completely agree. I mean, the support system is, what you mentioned earlier, Omar, is that you surround yourself with people who understand that topic and understand you as an individual as well. So you are comfortable to bring up certain things that maybe potentially you are going through. They would be comfortable to speak to you. For anyone listening right now who let's just say the individual doesn't know much about the mental health topic, doesn't know much about coping mechanisms, doesn't know much about the resources around them, where would you suggest is the first place to start?
That's a very big responsibility.
What would you, I mean, for you, when you started your journey, I mean, how did you form your support group? Was this a conscious thing, or did it kind of just fall into place?
It wasn't conscious in the beginning.
Right, because I'm quite aware that a lot of people potentially don't have the family around them, don't have the friends around them. Maybe their workplace is toxic, whatever it may be.
For sure. I think for me, the way everything formulated is that I'm a reader. So I used to read a lot. Now not so much, actually. So eventually, like whether I was reading newspaper articles or books or whatever, I had that image formed about mental health in my head. Now, whenever I have a long commute, I listen to podcasts, and most of the podcasts I listen to are about mental health, spirituality, coping mechanisms, and all of that. I think for me that helped me form my knowledge. I wouldn't say that it's the only way to form your knowledge. I think whichever medium works for you, whether you're someone who likes to watch YouTube videos, I watch YouTube videos whenever I'm having lunch by myself. I enjoy that. It's my favorite way to consume both knowledge and food. Whether you like to listen to podcasts, whether you like to read scholarly articles or like things on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, I think just find the medium that suits you most, and then the world is yours. You can find out whatever you want through just seeking it. But I feel once you actually invest in that, the quality of your life will change, in the sense that the topics of conversation that you have are also going to change. And eventually, that's how you're going to form your support system. Or at least that's how it worked for me.
And knowledge really is power in every aspect of life. Dani, when it comes to therapy, a lot of people, again, I think not even just in the older generations, even the young friends that I have, people within my community, I would never go to therapy. Why would I need to go to therapy? It's almost, they get so defensive, the ego gets triggered. Why do you think that is?
Because it's a very reactive source of support. So the stigma of mental health, the stigma of therapy, stigma of therapists, there's so much kind of baggage that it carries. So, be it down to movies, featuring shrinks or, big shows, all the American shows, everyone's got therapists and they're kind of like exhibiting sort of behaviors that you probably don't want to ascertain. You don't want to be, associated with that kind of space. So I think we've got a really, steep hill ahead of us, but a lot of work to do around destigmatizing therapy and helping people. And this is a conversation that I've even had with my mum, helping her to understand what the relationship with a therapist should look like. It's not just about you see in the movies, someone sat there on the couch and you telling them your sort of deepest, darkest secrets, which of course that is like actually petrifying. Why would you want to go there? But using it almost as a preventative tool to go and, work on that self-awareness, understand, things are important to you, how your life is aligned in all its kind of glory to where you're at, to make sure that it's something that you prevent going into kind of crisis mode. Because actually when you're in crisis mode, even like Omar was saying, the information that's out there, you're going to find everything overwhelming, and there's almost like too much information at that space. So really what we need to do is keep people in that kind of more well space where you're actually a lot more susceptible to brilliant information, you're going to be less overwhelmed with what's out there, your different choices, and position therapy as something that people do or partake in as a preventative tool versus something that's a reactive space.
What's interesting is the preventative topic here, because do you think it's possible, Omar, to prevent a mental health issue before? Do you think that's possibly a thing, or is it just accepting that we all have it. Like we said earlier, it's not even now the topic needs to change, the conversation needs to change. We know it's not what is mental health, but unfortunately there are still people who are there, like we said. So do you think mental health issues can be prevented necessarily?
I don't think I'm equipped to answer this question accurately. I don't think mental illnesses or mental health issues, I'm not sure if they can be prevented or not, but I think with the right tools and the right resources, maybe the impact they have on individuals' lives may be alleviated. But if I may add to what Dani said, I also think people are scared. Perhaps they're scared to confront their demons or to even know who their demons are.
Yeah, very much so. I was speaking to a friend recently and they were like, I don't want to go to therapy because they'll, I love my parents and I don't want them to tell me that it was my parents' fault. Like that, that was essentially his biggest fear, finding this out. And I think, we risk everything that we know about our identity getting reshuffled, and it's not as big as that, but it's just again what we know it to be, which is preventing people from getting the help.
Yeah, I know, and absolutely. And what I actually really appreciate, especially here in the UAE, is that shift. It has happened at such a drastic rate, in an incredibly positive way. So, Omar, how have you seen that shift, especially here in the region?
I think more and more people are talking about it. I think, especially among my peers, Emirati males, I think I've noticed a more open conversations between my friends, whether it was with me or with each other, whether they're talking about, I don't know, their worries or taking time off. I wouldn't have perhaps expected this 2 years ago. I'm not sure what caused the shift. Could it be the information? Could it be the pandemic? But I'm just glad it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And Dani, with you, I guess, with a safe space, you touched on the corporate side of things, the shift that is happening. Personally, how have you seen that kind of develop?
So I think a lot more people are prioritising their mental health. Exactly like Omar in my friendship group, people that I would have never expected. Like I'm the emotional one in my friendship group, and to hear like some of the lads sort of talking about the stress and anxiety that they're struggling with, it seems to be a lot more socially acceptable now to say those things out loud, have those conversations, be that kind of anxious that previously was sort of seen as being weak, and that everybody's experienced. Because I think this is like anyone that hasn't felt anxiety or stress in the past 18 months, like check they've got a pulse, because it's been pretty stressful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anxiety has been, at an all-time high. So I think that has allowed, like, given people the permission to have more of those conversations. And I think in the workplace, that's even kind of filtered through also. So people have felt more confident and empowered to say to their boss, I'm not okay, this isn't okay. I think it's a lot of people potentially have had those conversations at breaking point, like I'm going to leave if this isn't sorted, or I have to leave because I'm not sorted, So I think a lot of those conversations have happened, are happening. I think there's ways that we can help them happen, sooner. And again, in that prevention space, looking at how, workplaces really approach this topic sooner rather than later, in order to make sure that they don't lose their best talents, to make sure that they are attracting the best people in the market to do that job. And that's really one of our kind of aspirations.
I'm glad you touched on that, Dani, because that was going to be my next question. But Omar, I guess you can answer this as well. Where are you hoping that we move forward now when it comes to the mental health topic? I know you said we want to shift it from what is mental health to, okay, what tools can I use to really further expand my knowledge, but where else would you like this conversation to go?
I would like to steer away from misinformation. I would like us to see mental health as not just this toxic positivity kind of conversation. I would like us to, as a collective, actually confront the dark side of it, understand that there are demons in everyone's mind. There are perhaps clouds above everybody's head that just follow them everywhere. And I actually saw this article the other day about the the conversation on mental health on Instagram. I wasn't aware of it before the article, actually. It was talking about how certain accounts or certain therapists promote mental health issues as a trauma response. But in the sense that perhaps everybody has trauma, whichever way you're acting today is because of your trauma, your past, all of that stuff. But it doesn't really give justice to people whose mental illnesses are due to physiological disorders, genetic disorders, neurological disorders. What is their trauma other than the fact that they were born with conditions that they cannot change? So I guess just sharpening the knowledge that we have, making sure that we step away from misinformation and just increased accessibility of resources and tools. Perhaps we have therapists, we have centers, but can people afford them? Can people book appointments with them? Do people know that these places exist? Do people know that this therapist promotes harmful coping mechanisms? I don't know what future that would look like. I don't know what form this would take. Perhaps online forums, perhaps rating websites, whatever it is. I just hope that whatever I mentioned is included in the next stages. And I'm just very hopeful that it would actually happen, because I see NGOs for mental health rising. I see partnerships happening between each other. I see initiatives by governments and companies that are catering to mental health. I see social enterprises being started to promote mental health in whichever way or shape that may look like.
And like we said, it is definitely going in the right direction. Dani, is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of which way we're going and how hopeful we can be?
Yeah, I think everything that Omar said, 110%, I'm behind every single one of those points. And I think maybe how our perspective, like focusing on the workplace, that misinformation a lot of time in the workplace is, HR leaders or people leaders or business owners not really knowing their team. We have an assessment tool that we've built, and is an anonymous tool that helps, the team leaders to better know what their staff are going through. And it's so surprising that these business owners don't know that there's somebody, on their team that's struggling with PTSD or an eating disorder, and really to bring that information to them, but they have to want to know. So really for us, it's about that drive for people to actually want to find out this information and then what they're going to do about it. So for us, I think we are definitely seeing a kind of uptake. The whole kind of ecosystem for mental well-being, from the very sort of clinical side to, like we're saying, the grassroots. I think it needs to have even more supports. The rest of the world definitely have a lot of those more supportive structures, I think, even from like NGOs and social enterprises in place. We want to see more of this, more companies kind of standing up, doing the right thing, and really just looking forward to where it goes and being part of it, holding hands with amazing companies like with Hope to see it shift.
Well, you know what, I'm just hoping a conversation like this, 100 more of them, will get us definitely in the right direction. Both of you, thank you so much for your time. I know we could have probably sat here for a very long time and spoken a lot more. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
To listen to more episodes of KEF Connect, you can visit kefholdings.com and go to KEF Connect page. We are also available on various streaming platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, the Podbean podcast app, and more.